Enlightening Minds series, where our aim is to nurture curiosity across the whole of our King's community. Thank you very much for joining us either in person or online via the live stream. I do have a bit of practical business before we begin. We do not have a fire drill scheduled, but in the very unlikely event of a fire, please follow our two fire stewards' directions and assemble on the first 15 pitch. We are delighted to put on these intellectually inspiring talks free of charge to the King's community. Thank you to those who donated to the school's bursary fund when you booked your tickets. If you haven't done so already, please do consider retrospectively doing this via the King's community page of the school website. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk, and those who are watching online can use the hashtag KCS Enlightening Minds on X. I'm now going to pass over to Alex and Kai to introduce our speaker.
So we are absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Kingsley Ugwuanyi, a distinguished scholar in this field of world Englishes and applied linguistics. He's currently a senior lecturer at KCL and has studies at taught at a wide range of institutions, including SOS, London University of London. He's had also a very large impact on the field of world Englishes, having contributed most recently, I think, 29 words to the Oxford English Dictionary as a consultant on Nigerian English.
Yeah, I think just to echo Kai's words, we're so lucky to have a man of such strong caliber with us today. And although me and Kai actually happen to be English university applicants, I think this is a talk that, I mean, if you speak English ideally, will apply to you. So yeah, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kingsley Ugwuanyi. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kyle and Alex, for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Good evening to everybody. I will start immediately, and I've been introduced. And as I suppose everybody here knows, our topic tonight is who decides what counts as English? And probably there will be even more questions like that to follow. I'm going to plead with you, if you have a phone, this is Mentimeter, to just engage us a bit with that phrase, proper English. It's a common expression we hear all the time. Oh, he speaks proper English. Or you speak proper. Oh, you speak proper English. That's not proper English. So we hear that all the time. And my question, what ideas conjure up in your mind when you hear that sort of phrase? What kind of ideas do you have in your mind? All right, I'm going to give us half a minute to do that. You can put 1, 2, 3, 4 words, or just one word or expression. Right, so if I present that, right, so I would go to the next. Right, sorry, that's not super clear. But then we see different things that people have in mind. And what appears quite, most obvious there is Queen, right? Queen's English, and we know that's where it's coming from. And then we see things like simple, native speaker English, understandable, royals, not slang, dictionary, which is good, dictionary form. King's English, good. We have a king now, right? Radio 4, interesting. Grammar, class, education, overt prestige, and standardized English. And that's a word I will come back to later on. All right. When I first arrived in the UK, before we do that, when I first arrived in the UK many years ago, I received once in a while, people say, oh, someone told me, oh, you speak very good English. You speak proper English. It was meant as a compliment, I understood. But it made me pause and think. English is the official language of Nigeria. I'm Nigerian, where I come from. And it is the language of education. So I practically grew up from primary, nursery education in English. And it is the language I've spoken for many years. So what exactly counted as good English? What exactly counted as proper English? And who should decide who says this is proper English and this is not proper English? And that's going to take me to the second Mentimeter, if you don't mind. Right. So who should decide? Who should decide what counts as proper English? Let's see what people think. So we've seen of all the ideas that people have in mind when they think of the word proper English, the expression proper English. If everybody has got that, so we go back to our Menti. Right. So I'm going to go to the next slide, which is who decides. Have we? Oh, sorry, I think we were still on the first one. Can we do this one again? It's not showing. 22 responses. Okay. Popular usage, okay, it's popping up now. It's not showing, sorry. This is, yeah. Okay, who should decide? Dictionary, institutions of education, like King's College School, and native speakers, editorial boards, Oxford Dictionary, good. Well, it's good, Oxford Dictionary is popping up. Universities. No one should, okay, interesting. Native speakers. Popular usage. Right. Good. Readers, okay. Interesting. Right. So we've seen that we do not all have the same opinion about these. Right. We know that today, English is one of the most geographically spread languages in the world. English is currently spoken by an estimation of about 1.5 to 2 billion people. But one interesting thing about this is that out of this number, only about 600 million or thereabouts constitute those who speak English as their first language. And I have carefully and very intentionally did not use the word native speakers, and I'll tell you why as we proceed. It is spoken practically in every country for different purposes, for education, for business, and for all kinds of purposes, and in different forms. English is what it is today. I was just having a conversation with my colleague in the office this afternoon about why English has prospered more than French. He's French, and I was having this conversation intentionally because of this talk. So, and one of the things we mentioned is that one of the reasons why English has been able to prosper more than other global languages is that ability to absorb, the malleability of English, the ability to absorb cultures, absorb words from other languages. Unlike French, which has the French Academy that policies the use, the grammar, the acceptability of what is French and what is not French, what is correct and what is not correct. And researchers upon researchers have said that this is one of the reasons why the language, which is one of the reasons why English is what it is today. I just give one example, the example of prepone, and I'll give more examples. Does anybody know, I mean, we should know, even if you have not heard the word before, by instinct, what that word means, isn't it? Right? We do know. Has anybody here used the word prepone before? Anybody used it? Right. Anybody heard of it? Okay, someone has used. Anybody heard of the word? No? Right. But do we know it is just the opposite of postpone? Does it make sense to us as the opposite of postpone? And this word is coming from India, arguably, and we will see that what I'm going to show the Oxford English Dictionary definition of the word prepone as we move on. But in current usage, this word is emerging. It's now beginning to be used across the world. Even in the UK, if you go to English corpora, you will see that even British speakers of English in the UK are also beginning to use this word. It's not as widespread as it is in India, because it's a cultural thing. Because there are two things. An event can be postponed, right? An event can also be preponed. But what happens is that in the culture that gave birth to postpone, right, there is not so much of preponing events. For example, this event was slated for 6:30 tonight. And then, if we postponing events could mean moving it to tomorrow, or moving it to 7 p.m. Preponing it means bringing it perhaps to 5:30, or having it earlier. But this is a cultural thing. Among Indians, preponing events is common, right? And that's why when Indians speak English has given them that word postpone, but has not given them the word prepone, which actually explains a cultural practice. And as a result, that word has had to be formed. But we'll see later that there is something happening with that word even beyond it coming from India. And this is from Ingrid Pila, who is a professor of linguistics. And this is just an idea of how many speakers of English we have across the world. The interesting figures there will be number 7, the UK. Probably more than that, right? But of course we know not everybody in the UK speaks English. But possibly more than that number. But the interesting thing that tells us is there are millions of speakers, of course, in the US. But look at number 2 is India. Number 3 is Nigeria, Pakistan, and even China. Right, of course, for obvious reasons, because of the large population. So I will come back to what these numbers mean to us. So if you are calculating in terms of usually the UK is called an English-speaking country, and we can think of other English-speaking countries. But when we think of the US, we think of the US as an English-speaking country. When we say a country is an English-speaking country, what do we mean? That the majority of people in that country speaks the language, not necessarily everybody, right? So in a country characterized as English-speaking, it's just the majority. So numbers matter. When it comes to languages, numbers matter. I come from Nigeria, where there are about 529 languages spoken among about 230 million people. And out of these hundreds of languages, 3 are said to be national languages or co-official languages with English, and that's Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. And what's the reason? What reason did the government give for calling these ones national languages or official languages? Because of number, because the majority of Nigerians speak these 3 languages. So when it comes to languages and policies around language and issues about language, numbers matter. How many people who speak a particular language matter? If it does, then it shows that probably the UK is even in the minority of people who speak English across the world. I'll come back to that. But we know that all Englishes are not equal. Should they? Perhaps. Are they? Maybe not. Some varieties are called standard. This is a term that came up in the Menti we saw. Standard. For example, this is a prestigious academic institution, so I should not speak my Geordie. By the way, I live in Newcastle upon Tyne, so I identify as Geordie. So the plural of you is yous, right? I shouldn't say such here, right? I shouldn't speak that way, right? Because that is not standard. Therefore, it is not proper English, right? Some are called dialects, right? Others are called proper English, all right? Incorrect, bad. We've seen all of that. We see that when we think about varieties, which is more a fairly neutral term, we're talking about different types of English. In the UK, we have the Scouse accent, right? We have the Geordie accent. We have the Brummie accent, right? And all of these accents, right? We call them accent. We call them dialect. So, but there is another dialect, which is also a type, a variety. We do not call dialect. We call it standard, but it's also a type the same way the other ones are a type. But there are reasons for that because it is associated with prestige, as we've seen. English has always been declining. People have always complained that your English is proper, your English is not proper. Speak this and do not speak this. It is a historical reality. So throughout history, self-appointed guardians of language, right, have complained that English is deteriorating. It didn't start from today, and I'll show a few examples. Things like hopefully, ending sentences with preposition, irregardless. But I'll draw an example from this material. This book, a very interesting one, I very, very strongly recommend this book, written by Amon Shear. Amon Shear is the first human being to finish reading the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, not the abridged one, but the full volume, and did a book on it called Reading the OED. So, but after writing that one, he wrote another one called Bad English, A History of Linguistic Aggravation. And the whole argument about this book is that some of the words we use today and accept in all contexts, even as standard, are words that people said were bad English at some point in history. And people condemned. And a few examples, Kingsley Amis, we know, the King's English writer, say, when someone says or writes, hopefully, the plan will be in operation by the end of the year, we know immediately that we are dealing with a dimwit at best. All right, and so what Shea did, what Amon did here was to give an example that this was Kingsley Amis complaining about, hopefully, not being a good word in 1997, but there's already evidence of the use of that one word as far back as 1981, even before then. Right, he said in 2012, the Associated Press announced, we now support the modern use of hopefully, which in certain circles was tantamount to saying we now support beating. I cut that off. But just to show us that as recently as 2012, the word hopefully was still very controversial, whether it should be used in the context it is used now. I drew a few more examples. The word enormity, which is the noun we derive from enormous, right? And it says here, say hooray for telling the modelers how monstrous it is to use enormity, where enormousness is meant, all right? But enormity of you, colossal, was already used. So several years ago, Barack Obama created a stir in the community of individuals who generally refer to themselves as the people who care about language, the linguistic pedants, as we call them. Another word is belittle, and this is what Fitzward Hall said. He said, belittle has no chance of becoming English. And this is a word we use today very comfortably without even thinking that there's anything wrong with it. He says, and as the more critical writers of America, like all those of Great Britain, we feel no need of it. The sooner it is abandoned to the incurably vulgar, the better. All right. But there's evidence that this word is in use. And then we think of the word graduate. I don't know if you can see that, but this is Alfred saying that students do not graduate. They are graduated. And this is in the 19th century, 1894. But we all say, I'm going to graduate today. And everybody feels very comfortable with it. There's nothing wrong with that. Another example is the word invite. And the comment here in 1917 was, he said that invite is a needless barbarism, since we have the correct and established term invitation. So why do we have to say, have you sent out the invite, instead of saying, have you sent out the invitation? But we use these two terms interchangeably today and very comfortably. So complaints about what is proper English and what is correct English and what is standard English did not just happen in the 1970s and 1890s, as I've mentioned. It has continued till date. For example, this is 2 years ago. Said Americanisms are poisoning our language. So till today, many Brits still think that American English is no English. Right? It is a poison. And look at the kind of images and symbolisms that are used to describe American English. And then when it is to be, when the images of these negative images, right, are to be emphasized, the word is Americanism, not American English. All right? But we rarely today do talk about Briticisms, which are there, actually. Said, from I'm good to train station, British English is being assailed, another interesting word, by American usage like never before. Are you embracing the US imports? Right, another example. I can't follow a conversation. Readers lament Americanisms creeping into British English, creeping into. So these things have continued, these complaints, and this is just like 3-4 months ago, right? November 2025. So the complaints about what is proper English, if it is not Queen's English, which was the most obvious word we saw in the first Menti, then it is not English. It is not proper English. So what we've seen is that yesterday's bad English, yesterday's words that were said, this has no chance of surviving as English, they become today's good English. So if you can postulate by that, today's bad English can and will become tomorrow's good English. So why do we need to bother? I can draw a lot more examples from Amonche's book: aggravate, literally, disinterested, decimate, innovate, bemuse, irregardless, amuse, socialist, initiate, interface, actually, is what I meant to write there. So all these words were at one point in history, and there are many of them. If you read that book, I strongly, strongly recommend. There are many of them that people said, no, this word cannot be an English word. It cannot survive. It survived. It went into the lexicon, if you like, the dictionary, and today used in formal context. Right. How does a variety become standard? How did we come about what we call today as standard English? And even if I had done another Menti, I said, what does standard mean? What does standard English mean? You will see that different people have different perceptions about what the standard is. Some people will tell you it is the language, it is the kind of English taught in schools or spoken in schools. Some will say it's the kind of English you hear in BBC. And there are complaints. People are complaining that BBC now has been corrupted by all kinds of accent. There was a time in history when BBC favored a particular kind of accent. But today, diversity is what it is, right? All kinds of accents are heard across all BBC stations. Right, so the variety, I've written about this actually in this one of my publications, right, where I was writing the context of standard in the context of, I was about standard in the context of Nigerian English. And I've said taught in schools, tested in examinations, and written in style guides. It's one of the words we saw when we were defining what is proper English, what is there in style guides. And broadcasting media, and recorded in dictionaries. Dictionary is also a word that came up again and again in the Menti we did. But the point I want to make with this, and I will make as we progress, that standard, what we call standard English, is not natural. It's a human creation. It is institutional. It is the same language variety of a people, right? It's a language variety that gains legitimacy when institutions reinforce it, right? Scholars have examined, as one of the things I wrote in this paper, with the processes a variety undergoes before that variety of English is called the dialect. And I'll show more examples why. How did we arrive at what we have today as standard? When we hear the word standard, I've said, what are the kind of things, ideas, images that conjure up in our mind? The word standard carries a lot of ideological baggage, such as we think of superiority. It is the superior variety. We think of authority. It has authority because it's backed by institutions. We think of ideas like correctness, right? Uniformity. There should be one standard, which brings to mind that idea of monolithism. And linguistic purism. There's this thing about being pure. The language is not pure enough, right? If it is Jodi English, then it's not pure enough, isn't it? But it also conjures up those notions of colonialism and Eurocentrism as well. But the most important for me there is the issue of power and privilege. And gatekeeping and monitoring and telling people, you stay where your English is not good enough. You come in, your English is good enough. and the real life impact using such phrases, the real life impact they will bring. And I'll draw one example as we move on. Respectability, if you speak standard English, you command respect. Linguistic hierarchy, there's this hierarchy where standard English sits at the very highest, at the highest. And then there's accent bias, which is a big thing, The biases people have when you hear an accent, when you hear somebody speak with a Nigerian accent like me, or when you hear someone speak with a Birmingham accent. What kind of things come up in our minds when we hear these accents? And all of these lead to stigmatization. And research upon research has shown that people suffer unnecessary consequences in life because of the kind of English they speak, which most times is not anything about their own doing. Right, I'll just draw one example. This is a recent study published by Cambridge scholars last year. And it says, Brits still associate working class accents with criminal behavior. So study warns of bias in the criminal justice system. People who speak with accents perceived as working class, including those from Liverpool, Newcastle, Bradford, London, risk being stereotyped as more likely to have committed a crime and becoming victims of injustice, a new study suggests. And there have been studies upon studies upon studies, especially in the US, where people lose chances. And there was this interesting study where it's about getting property, right? Renting in the US. And people lost opportunity to rent a house just because of the accent. So this study, in this study, what they did was to get people speaking all kinds of accents from the US, and they would call a potential landlord and say, I want to rent a house. And the landlord says, there's no house. And then another person picks and calls, I want to rent a house. And then the house becomes available immediately. And the key difference in all of this, in the end, was just the kind of accent the landlord had on the phone. So people lose opportunities. So these things have real-life impact when we judge other people by their accent. So I want to play this video from, and it's from GBN, and just for the interest of those who are watching online and from home, you may not be able to see this video, so it's not a glitch, but it's just like 4 minutes, 5 minutes video. Probably we're not going to watch everything. But let's listen to this conversation, those here in the hall.
People get discriminated about based on their accents.
Yes, I think they do. I think you probably get it. Well, I mean, you read out one of the reviewers.
Oh, I get loads of reviews about what I sound like.
It's an interesting, and you can find it on YouTube and watch if you wanted. Having a Bath is the title on YouTube. So we see the kind of discussion going on here, and what the gentleman who just finished talking, who is a professor, actually, there's, I think, London South Bank University, he's saying that when people are discriminated against because of their accent, because of their kind of English, that to him is not discrimination. And this is the kind of attitude that many people have. But then the first speaker already mentioned, who is an anthropologist, that these things come with real life. When you hear this accent, you think somebody is less intelligent or less human because of the kind of accent they have. So I'll go on. So why do we think, if we can do this Menti, this is the last Menti we are going to do. So why do we think that some varieties, what are the factors that make us regard some varieties as more prestigious? Why do we think some varieties are more prestigious? All Englishes are equal, but some are more equal than others. And that's from George Orwell's Animal Farm, if you remember. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than the others. I think that's from Napoleon, if you remember that interesting story from George Orwell. Napoleon and Snowball, read that many years ago. So, yeah, I'll try to see if I can find Menti this time. Right. Okay, it's coming up. Yeah, okay. Is average wealth of speakers? Can you see that? No? Okay, that's not showing. Okay, so I need to, yeah. Right. Education is coming up because it's associated with education. Right. Spoken by more powerful people. Yeah, I like that. Education is coming out tops there. So there's education, is primarily everything. Colonialism, okay, perhaps associated with the elite, class superstructure, more globally understood, right? More globally understood because that was the variety that was exported globally, right? Racial bias is popular, right? Heard more often, okay? That's spoken by more, okay, I've seen that. Wealth, longer history, okay, interesting, but perhaps debatable. Right, but the things that come up here, things like education, class, power, and this is very important. Colonialism is also coming up, right, but power, and power here is economic power, educational power, political power, very important. And research has shown us again and again that, I hope I can find, right, good. Research has shown us again and again that it's about power. And I say this when I teach my students, I say this, and people think, oh, maybe it's outrageous. And I say that if by any stroke of chance or luck or happenstance, call it whatever you want to call it, Newcastle upon Tyne, where I live, the best city in the UK, by the way, becomes the capital of England tomorrow, do we think that Geordie accent, and by capital I mean political capital, economic capital? Don't think about possibility. I'm not thinking about possibility, but we just sleep and wake up one day and everything has turned, right? So all the power structures in England and in the southern part of England, in London and the southern part, everything moves. Cambridge University moves, Oxford moves. All the political structures and economic structures you have in London, everything moves, right? Down to the northeast, and then stays there for a while. Do we think that how we see Geordie might change? Would we continue to consider Geordie a lower accent, like many people in the UK do? There are several studies about that. Think about it. Maybe yes, maybe no. So, I'll move a bit now and talk a little about how does a word enter the dictionary. In today's world, the dictionary is usually seen as the model of standard. And we saw that actually in the Menti, that most people said dictionary. Some people even specifically said Oxford Dictionary. I've worked with Oxford as a consultant for a number of years, since 2018. And my role is to consult for them for Nigerian English and West African Englishes as well. That's what actually researchers call these varieties of English that we have across the world. Englishes, right? We have American English, British English, Nigerian English, Indian English, as I've mentioned. And some years ago, the OED, actually, of course, we know, prides itself as the comprehensive record of the English language. And they came to realize that English is no longer singular. English no longer begins and ends with British English. Because, in fact, some say that English is what it is today in the world, not so much because of Britain, but perhaps even more because of America, because of the media, political, military power. Military power. I don't want to talk about the military power of America now, right? But while British imperialism helped to transport English from the British Isles to all over the world, one of the forces that has continued to sustain English today is America, even though some Brits still think that American English is no English. So why am I saying that? Is that the OED said for us to really continue to claim that we are comprehensive record of, also say that a historical dictionary, we have to record actually Englishes in all of its forms, to include all kinds of English spoken from across the world. But before now, English dictionaries tended to be prescriptive. So when you speak, growing up in Nigeria, English was mostly a school language for me, right? So when people spoke anything that you don't understand, the first place you go to is a dictionary. You want to confirm that the dictionary has it. So actually it has held that prestige. But we do know that approach has changed, that dictionaries have become more descriptive to describe what people say rather than tell people what to say. So the OED does not invent words. It records documented usage. Some words enter quickly because of major social impact, a word like Brexit, for example, or COVID. Others enter because of their social, cultural impact. So OED is looking for things like evidence of use from different sources, time span of usage, frequency, how frequently is that word used, cultural significance, and all that. So the first set of Nigerian English words were added to the OED in 2020, even though there were a little added before then. But this was about 29 of them, which I think it was Alex or so who mentioned. But since then, these words, more and more and more words have continued to be added. Even in the last update, in the December update, a number of them were added as well. And this is the list of those added in 2020. So, I wanted to ask, especially the ones I asterisked, does it make sense to anybody? Any of them? Do you understand what that means? What any of them means? Or seen them anywhere? Would anybody guess what it means to eat money? Can anybody guess? Waste? Embezzle more. Okay. Anything else?
Next tomorrow is probably the day after tomorrow.
The day after tomorrow is next tomorrow, which I think is more creative than the day after tomorrow, in my own opinion. That's the variety of English I speak, by the way. But one of my favorite words here is embalmment. Embalmment. Does that make sense to anybody, what that means? I don't want to associate it with seasons. In a sense, yes. But can we make sense from that, from the months we have, January to December? Probably because that refers to the last 4 months of the year in Nigerian English. September, October, November, December. So that's embalmment. It said now, chiefly Nigerian. And why does the OED say now, right? Because we said the final 4 months of the calendar year, September to December, especially considered together as a period of heightened or intense activity. Usually people are coming towards the end of the year, they are planning, travel, traffic, and all of that. Very, very, very Nigerian thing, right? Right, but you see, because OED is a historical dictionary, what it does, what we do all the time when we're trying to look for what they call antedating. Antedating is the OED wants to find the very first instance that word was used, which is actually a myth. And I'll tell you why it's a myth. It's a myth because the OED would go to mostly written materials and sometimes spoken materials, and in today's world, social media, in the internet, to look for evidence. But we know that words predate writing. You start hearing words on the street before that word gets into books, right? That's usually the case. But what the OED does is to try to go back a bit in history to find the first textual evidence of the usage of that word. And what happened with embalmment is that it was found that that word was used in the 19th century, 1898, in the New York Times, where it said, "This season fills my feeling with a gentle sense of peace." Them embalmment is with, I like September, October, and November, and December, right? And then fast forward to Nigeria in 1988, right? Which is, they try to grade that by year. And what that tells us, right, immediately, and I draw another example from Prepone, which I mentioned earlier on about as coming from from Indian English, is that if you look at the first usage of that word is 1913, from New York Times again, where someone, probably J.J.D. Trenor, is saying, for the benefit mainly of the legal profession in this age of hurry and bustle, may I be permitted to coin the word prepone as a needed rival of that much revered and often invoked standby, postpone. And then we see another one in 1941, 1952, and then before we begin to see, even in independent, 1997. Right. It is not in today's consciousness of British speakers, or even American speakers, of that the word prepone exists. Another word like that, which is today characterized as chiefly Nigerian, is the word barb, B-A-R-B, which means to have a haircut. So you say, I'm going to barb my hair, right, in Nigeria. And then if you go to the OED, you find that that word was in use in the 18th century Britain as the equivalent of court. But if I told you I'm going to barb my hair, it probably may not make sense to those of us who are speakers of modern-day British English. So, and this is what I have called in one of my publications in the conversation as the whole world, because of what English has done. English has been very receptive, that the whole world is, English is giving back to British English. And I discussed this also in the sense of another example of Nigerian English, for example, giving back is what is happening in today's world, in the world of AI. It's published in The Guardian, and this Guardian newspaper is arguing that today, one of the words we hear when we see student essays and we say, oh, maybe this student wrote with AI, with ChatGPT, is when we hear the word delve, right? But this article says, I said delve was overused by ChatGPT compared to the internet at large, but there is one part of the internet where delve is a much more common word. And I was surprised when most people started saying, oh, delve is not in the common usage of every day, but growing up in Nigeria, even as far as in my secondary school, I already started using the word delve. I said in Nigeria, delve is much more frequently used in business English, and I dare say even in other contexts, than it is used in England or the US. So the workers training their systems from Nigeria provided examples of input and output that use the same language, eventually ending up with an AI system that writes slightly like an African. So African English, Nigerian English, Kenyan English, very, very prominent in this also, is giving back, as I've called it, to English. And we see that the influence is bidirectional, comes this way and also comes the opposite way. So who should decide then what counts as English? I come back to that question as I begin to round off. Should it be history, as we've seen, colonial history? Should it be society? Should it be institutions like education, like Queen's College School, like Cambridge, like dictionaries? Should it be media? Or should it be those who speak the language? And some of us have said it should be. No single authority, especially institutional authority, should decide. Language legitimacy emerges from social practice, institutional power, and collective acceptance. English has grown because it remains open to influence. If English stopped absorbing new forms, new meanings, new nuances, it might decline, as earlier world languages such as Ancient Greek and Egyptian also did. So, I'll give one example, which I wrote in this article I published with my PhD supervisor in World English sometime last year. And this is a very popular statement made by Marx. He said, a language is just a dialect with an army and a navy. You might need to, most times, I've thought many times why that person said that. So what we call a language, what is even a language? Right, what do we call a language? When is English a word? When is Geordie a language? And when is Geordie a dialect of English? And we see it is just a political decision. It's what we call a dialect becomes a dialect, and what we call a variety becomes a variety, a language. And I drew an example, which I drew this exactly from my publication. I said, Yugoslavia provides an interesting example of the extent to which the particular language is employed by different communities of speakers, an important aspect. And I move on to said, specifically, while there was a general agreement among Yugoslav population that they spoke one national language following the collapse of the Iron Curtain in 1989 and the subsequent disintegration of Yugoslavia into several nation-states in the early 1990s, both Serbian and Croatian were intentionally recategorized by their respective speech communities as distinct languages. And these were languages that were said to be dialect. Until today, we know that these languages remain mutually intelligible. So the process of recategorization involved emphasizing and creating new differences. This is human action now. Reviving old differences and developing unique vocabularies and grammars for each language. More broadly, what speakers previously considered mutually intelligible varieties of the same language became recategorized, became recognized as representing 4 distinct languages today called Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, and Serbian, despite their shared linguistic roots and continued mutual intelligibility. And I leave you with this reflection. If English belongs to many people across the world, perhaps the more interesting question is not who owns it, but who gets to shape its future, especially considering that the majority of speakers of English across the world are people who live outside the so-called native speaker countries. And final thoughts. All languages matter, all varieties matter. Language are what we call them. It is what we call languages that they are. And all varieties of a language matter, and all Englishes matter. Thank you so much. These are a few references. And then thank you for listening. I've taken slightly more time than I was given. Right. I'm happy to receive questions.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we can all agree that was a simply fascinating talk. We'd like to start and give a question each, and then we'll open it up to the floor, see what we have today. I think personally something that I'm really interested in is what measures do you think we can take as a world, as a society, to bring true equality among all the Englishes, as you mentioned in your talk? Do you envisage this as a possibility in the near future?
Inequality is the nature of human beings, right? What the OED, for example, is doing is a step in the right direction by recognizing, by giving platform to all Englishes. By that, they are making a very bold statement. And we know what the kind of institutional prestige that the OED has. That if these Nigerian, Jamaican, Indian, Pakistan, Korean English words are seen in the OED, and anybody can open them anywhere and read their meanings and read the context in which they are used, then we should all just follow that step by recognizing that people shouldn't be judged by their accent or the kind of English they use.
For sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your really interesting talk. One thing I was wondering is what you thought the main pressures would be that are causing institutions like the OED to begin to adopt world Englishes. Would you think those would be things like, you mentioned the impact of ChatGPT and, I suppose, spreading almost these world Englishes. Do you think that had an effect?
Well, probably yes, because we see that people with AI, people are beginning to speak alike. There was an incident in the world of football last year where 2 footballers, I don't know if anybody followed it, one from, I can't remember their names, but one from EPL, one from Italian league, Spanish league, I can't remember, were leaving clubs, leaving their clubs, and they made a social media post, all those usual posts, it's been a pleasure playing for this club, I'll miss blah, blah. And 2 different footballers in 2 different countries wrote exactly the same statement, word for word, right? And shared on social media in a space of a day or 2 days. All right, and that is a thing, right? Social media it's AI going to make everybody speak the same kind of language? Probably no, because language is much more than that. Language is culture, it carries a lot of things, and this is something I'm writing about currently, and it's being called the standardization paradox in AI, where AI has the potential to unify a language, which shouldn't be. Diversity is the spice of life, isn't it? But also, there are potentials in which AI can also help to sustain every kind of English. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in your talk, and it was kind of laced throughout, the concept of Americanism. Why do you personally think that I guess compared to all the other Englishes, we as British, English speakers kind of fear or turn our nose up at American English specifically? Do you think it's historical, class-based?
Yeah, history. Colonialism is there. America is the child of Britain, all right? If I should put it in that very simple sense. But probably much more is going on there. It is that still idea of linguistic purism. There is a kind of English, that idea that there's a kind of English that is pure and shouldn't be tampered with, all right? That anything that deviates from this pure structure, this pure variety is abnormal. But we've seen that historically, that language, if there is anything that is dynamic, is language. Language moves. And that has been the greatest strength of English, the ability to move, the ability to change, the ability to adapt. And English adapts a lot. English finds any culture and adapts and is ready to absorb every culture. And I think that's a great strength of the language, which we should continue to hold. If you remove America, the influence of English in today's world would diminish. I wouldn't say would disappear. English is gaining grounds by the day because people have found that, globalization is a big thing. People want to travel, people want to associate with everybody. I want to go to Korea, I want to be able to go to any country in the world, I'll be able to communicate, right, with people without necessarily learning their language. And the language that offers that is English, so that's a lot. But the recognition that every kind of English matter is not possible. It's not even desirable that everybody should speak the same kind of English, because that's just going to be monotonous. If all of us, why are we complaining that people are speaking AIEs or AI English as it's called? Because it's monotonous. If you are going to write to your teacher to say something and then you prompt ChatGPT to generate a reply for you, and another person prompts ChatGPT to generate a reply, it's just going to read the same way, even if it's not word for word. And that's going to be just monotonous for everybody to read. So having one English is a monotony that I don't think the world should aspire for. Yeah.
I think we should open up to the floor and online for questions. And just a reminder, I've been told, if you have any specific thoughts or feelings you'd like to share about this great talk, hashtag KCS Enlightening Minds on Twitter and other platforms, I believe, and you can share them there. So yeah, any questions from the floor, just raise your hand. Sorry, if you just repeat your question into the mic for
the OED, on the English Oxford English Dictionary, how it's, who runs it, who's on the board, who decides, who makes decisions?
Well, we know that the OED is affiliated to Oxford University, but Oxford University Press, that actually publishes OED and also publishes many other educational material, has become a bit independent. But most of the people who work with the Oxford actually also affiliated with Oxford Dictionary with Oxford University. But I don't know at this minute who and the specific individuals who are in the board of Oxford English Dictionary. Yeah, but it has historical and even current affiliation with Oxford University. Yeah.
Over at the back there.
You mentioned about like ancient Greek and languages that sort of died out because of their failure to adapt and sort of change with society. Do you think that there's some sort of languages that would under trouble that will happen to them because of like setting words in dictionaries and sort of putting them in institutions, things like that?
I'm not sure I got to your question. You're talking about like ancient Greek, right? Or Latin that died, so to speak.
Do you think some languages are under threat of that now because they're being put in dictionaries?
You mean some languages are under threat because they are not?
Because they are being sort of restricted and not being allowed to change.
Oh yes, any language that doesn't change will die because things happen. 50 years ago, there was no word called Brexit. 7 years ago, or 8 or so, there was no word called COVID-19. All right? Things happen. Things happen all the time. And these things that happen need to be named, right? So when a language refuses to evolve with time, it is going to die off. But also, that's only one factor. There are several factors that make a language die. And one of the factors is English. English has been called again and again a killer language, right? Because when it appears, it suffocates other languages, especially, it might not be a big, well, it is a big thing even here in the UK. I did my postdoc at University of London, was on Cornish, right? I was studying Cornish, what was happening in Cornwall for 3 years. And I realized that Cornish people till today still complain of English colonialism, and that Cornish died because of English, right? And if you go back a little bit in history, you see that there was a proclamation at some point for people to stop, especially in church, stop speaking Cornish. So that Cornish people, some of them still feel that sense of colonialism, right? So there are other factors, that's the point I was trying to make, political factors, economic factors. But the greatest, in my own opinion, I would say, is use. Once a people stop using their language and stop allowing their language to grow as life progresses, then that language will die. Yeah.
Just round here at the front.
I spend a lot of time with non-native speakers of English, and they're always a bit scared when they've got an English speaker with them. Saying, we've got to get it right. And I've noticed a lot of English speakers are very bad at speaking with non-natives. Do you think native English speakers are going to lose out to non-native in the development of international English?
A lot of researchers, and one of them is Jennifer Jenkins with the University of Southampton, has written a lot about international English and has found that some of the features of international English come from outside the native speaker contexts, right? And I did say at the beginning that I don't like using the word native speaker. Anytime I use it, I pause, because that's an ideologically loaded term, right? I tend to prefer first language, those who speak English as their first language. But yes, a lot is changing. And what I see sometimes, a sense of pride, a sense of insensitivity on the part of the so-called native speakers. There's no, people are native speakers of their language. I usually say I am a native speaker of Nigerian English, right? But that's for another day. But when it comes to communication, it's a two-way thing. It's bidirectional, right? There is something called communication accommodation theory, CAT, which says that when two people are talking, it is not just the speaker's responsibility to make the hearer understand. It is not 100% the speaker's responsibility. The hearer also has a responsibility to make an effort to understand, because the two of them are interlocutors involved in a discussion, right? So you need to understand the speaker, and the speaker needs to communicate, right? So communication is both the speaking and the understanding. So there should always be that effort by, for example, I speak Igbo as my first language, right? If I have a British professor who lived in Nigeria and died. He was my mentor, by the way. He died a few years ago. He speaks Igbo, but not superbly fluently, right? So when I speak Igbo with him, and when I speak Igbo with my mother, I am completely different human beings at this, because I know that Igbo is not his first language, right? So I make an effort to try to understand him, to try to lower my expectations as an L1 speaker. And I think that's what Giles, the professor who's written about communication accommodation theory, has argued for many, many years, that when it comes to communication, there's always that tendency to place all the burden on the speaker you make me understand. Even when I don't want to understand, then how can the speaker help himself? So I think that addresses your question, that when it comes to non-native speakers and native speakers, so-called, again, I don't like that term, the responsibility is on the shoulders of everyone. Whether you're listening or whether you're speaking, there's always an effort to understand. And one way to understand is try to put yourself in that other person's shoes and say, can I even make an effort to speak the person's first language, which is most likely going to be a no. So that kind of responsibility should be shared. And if you convince yourself, it's a psychological thing, that's where it starts from. If you convince that you have a role to play to understand the other person, even though the person doesn't sound like me, right? That changes the whole game of communication. I don't know if I understood you. Yeah, at all. Okay. Right.
Any more questions? Oh, yes, at the front.
I think just on the point of making efforts when we speak, it strikes me that in English, there is a way that I can speak that is kind of casual and that I can use in an everyday context. And then there is a version that I use when I talk to my boss or when I'm in a job interview or if I was on the news where I'd make a bit more effort and I'd try to sound more polite and more clear. Yeah. But I guess if there is a version of English where you can sound more kind of universally acceptable or you sound like you're making more effort, you would always have the option of using that all the time, which would then create, I guess, this kind of hierarchy of Englishes. Yeah. So, I mean, do you believe that it is possible for us to have a kind of totally equal version of language in which it's still possible to make an effort at times? Or, I mean, you were kind of advocating what felt for like a more naturalistic version of English where we kind of accept all forms of it equally, but then I think that maybe presupposes that I can't have my effort-based version for a job interview.
Context is everything, right? We talk about registers. I think that's one of the things that was mentioned in the video we saw. So some people have said that the so-called standard English is a performance variety. People come to perform it in classrooms, on the TV, and they retire to their normal selves in the bar or the Wembley or to wherever, stadium, football stadium, and they or in their families, right, watching TV, they become their normal selves. And nobody speaks the kind of, the broadcasters who read the news, BBC, do not speak that way when they are in the beer parlor drinking with their friends. So context matters. Some years ago, in 2013, a secondary school called Sacred Heart School College or so, in Middlesbrough, the head teacher wrote a list of words and gave to children to give to their parents, and said, please help us correct your children when they speak this. Use is there, right? And then all the bo'a, right? Or bo'o. Sometimes my children say bo'o, right? And all of those judgy Northern English phrases, right? And it made national news all over the place, BBC, Independent, everywhere. The question is, why should the school police the kind of English that children speak at home? And that is the school not recognizing the importance of context. In school, we all are groomed, we all are socialized to know that context matters. And if I finish speaking like this, right, when I pick up my phone to call my wife and say, I've just finished, I'm going to jump on the train, even if I were speaking in English, it's going to be a completely different kind of English, right? Because I'm more relaxed. I know I'm not being monitored. I know I'm not being watched. I know nobody's going to televise and say, oh, you shouldn't have said this, this was said. Because at that point, we're not thinking about decorum. We're not thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about communication. That's all that matters to us at that very minute, when we become our real selves. So that most times, in fact, it's very good that what we call the standard in variety is not actually anybody's real variety. We all strive, we all come on to perform it, and then we go back and become ourselves. Yeah. I don't know if I scratched your question at all.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? Oh, up there in the middle. I have to snake around a bit for that.
It's I'm just curious, is there another language that could potentially challenge English in its evolution?
Well, that argument has been there, and David Crystal, one of the most prominent scholars of English, has written a lot about that. It is difficult. It's about the future, so nobody can say with certainty. But when I was starting, I did mention about numbers. Numbers matter a lot. The closest rival into this world will be Chinese, and it's about numbers. And one example I gave is that the institution, the university where I was teaching in Nigeria, University of Nigeria in Nsukka, when I was an undergraduate, 2004 to 2008, there was nothing like Chinese in my university, not taught. But around 2012, 2013 or so, the Department of Foreign Languages in the Faculty of Humanities introduced Chinese as one of the foreign languages. There is Chinese Confucius Institute now in many Nigerian universities, right? There are language centers in the city outside the university that teach Chinese, and people are interested, all right? Why? Something is happening in China. It's about money. It's about power. And this is the thing that I said about Geordie. If anything happens and the power shifts and Newcastle becomes the capital of England, perhaps of the world, people will be interested. That language that begins to change. People become interested because they want to go to China to do business. They want to talk with Chinese. Chinese go to across most universities in the UK now. You have Chinese all over the way. China has suddenly become, everybody has suddenly become interested in China, all right, because China has the money. That's all, right? China, as a country, sponsors projects. For example, in many African countries, for example, in Nigeria, they sponsor a railway project, and they manage it. Not just sponsor, fund it, and manage it. By managing it, it means that they are going to come, Chinese will work there. And you go in remote areas in Nigeria, in the villages, you find Chinese people living comfortably, speaking their language, and also making the people become interested in their culture. And the key factor in culture is language. So it's a potential contender, but English has time. It takes time, and today, I mean, I do not know, but China is what everybody seems to be pointing towards. I don't know how, we can't see tomorrow, I don't know. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Have we got any online questions? No. Any further questions in the room? Great, well, before we wrap up, hashtag KCS Enlightening Minds, share your thoughts, hopefully only positive. I'd like to share my personal thoughts, which I hope echo all of yours. I mean, that was a superb talk. Thank you so much for gracing us with your esteemed presence. And I think a final round of applause is due, so if you could join me.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.